In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where ancient civilizations have ruled for millennia and pride flows thicker than blood, there exists a simple truth that even the most powerful beings refuse to acknowledge. Sometimes, the greatest strength lies not in what you can endure, but in what you choose to walk away from. Today, you're about to witness the moment when a single human's quiet dignity shattered the foundation of an empire that had never learned the difference between respect and fear. This is the story of Marcus Chen, a humble agricultural engineer who became the catalyst for the most unexpected revolution in galactic history, not through violence or grand speeches, but through the simple, devastating power of turning his back and walking away. What happens when an empire built on subjugation meets someone who refuses to play by their rules? What happens when centuries of assumed superiority crumble in the face of quiet, unshakable human dignity? The answer will surprise you, inspire you, and remind you why humanity's greatest weapon has never been our technology or our armies, but our ability to choose our own worth, no matter what the universe throws at us. Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his brow as he examined the soil composition readings on his tablet. The red dirt of Kepler 442b stretched endlessly before him, dotted with the experimental crops that had become his life's work. 3 years he had spent on this frontier world, transforming barren wasteland into fertile farmland that could feed entire colonies. It was honest work, the kind that left him tired but satisfied at the end of each day. The morning sun cast long shadows across the fields when the ships appeared. Not the usual supply vessels or colonist transports that Marcus had grown accustomed to seeing. These were different, sleek, predatory things that moved with the fluid grace of apex predators. Imperial Vorthan vessels, their hulls gleaming like polished obsidian against the pale morning sky. Marcus continued his work as the ships descended. He had learned long ago that panicking never improved any situation. The Vorthan Empire controlled this sector of space, and, while they generally left human colonies alone as long as tribute was paid and borders were respected, their visits were rarely social calls. The lead ship touched down in the center of his experimental field, crushing months of careful cultivation beneath its landing struts. Marcus winced but said nothing. Protesting would accomplish nothing except potentially making the situation worse. He simply marked the coordinates on his tablet and calculated how long it would take to replant that section. The boarding ramp lowered with a pneumatic hiss, and Marcus got his first look at their visitors. Vorthans were impressive beings by any measure. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, with chitinous exoskeletons that shifted through deep purples and blues, they moved with predatory grace that spoke of countless generations as apex hunters. Their forearms were perfectly coordinated, each ending in hands that could crush steel or perform surgery with equal facility. Most intimidating of all were their compound eyes, multifaceted jewels that seemed to catch and hold every detail of their surroundings. The delegation that emerged was clearly important. Their exoskeletons bore intricate patterns that Marcus recognized as marks of high rank, and the way they moved spoke of beings accustomed to absolute authority. At their center walked a figure that made Marcus pause in his work despite his best efforts to remain inconspicuous. Princess Zaratai was young by Vorthan standards, perhaps equivalent to a human in her early 20s. But there was nothing youthful about the way she carried herself. Every movement was calculated, predatory, designed to demonstrate her superiority over everything around her. Her exoskeleton was deep royal purple, almost black, marked with silver patterns that indicated her status as a member of the imperial family. Her compound eyes swept across the human settlement with the kind of casual disdain usually reserved for something found on the bottom of one's shoe. Behind her came the retinue that such a figure demanded. Military officers whose very presence made the air feel heavier. Diplomatic attaches whose job it was to find legal justifications for whatever their mistress desired. Scientists and engineers who could evaluate the worth of what they found. And, bringing up the rear, a collection of servants whose only purpose was to remind everyone present of the vast gulf between the imperial family and everyone else. Marcus tried to return to his work, hoping they would conduct whatever business brought them here and leave without noticing one insignificant human farmer. But luck, as it often did, abandoned him at the crucial moment. "You there," Princess Zaratai's voice carried the kind of authority that expected immediate compliance. "Human. Approach." Marcus set down his tablet and walked over, maintaining what he hoped was a respectful but not servile posture. Years of dealing with various alien bureaucracies had taught him the value of being polite without being obsequious. Your Highness, he said with a slight nod. How may I assist you? The princess's compound eyes fixed on him with predatory intensity. You are the agricultural specialist responsible for this. She gestured dismissively at the surrounding fields, primitive farming operation. I am the agricultural engineer for this sector, yes, Marcus replied evenly. He had learned not to rise to casual insults about human technology or methods. Every species thought their way was superior until they needed food that actually grew in alien soil. Agricultural engineer, the princess repeated, her voice carrying a note of amusement that somehow managed to be completely without warmth. How charmingly optimistic of your species to assign such grand titles to basic subsistence farming. Several of her retinue made the chittering sound that passed for laughter among Vorthans. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks but maintained his composure. His work had fed hundreds of thousands of colonists across a dozen worlds. He had developed crop strains that could survive in environments that would kill most earth plants. His methods had been adopted by agricultural programs throughout human space and even by some alien species. But explaining any of that to someone who had already decided he was worthless would be a waste of breath. What brings the imperial delegation to our world? Marcus asked instead, trying to redirect the conversation towards something productive. Princess Zaratai's eyes narrowed, and Marcus realized he had made a mistake. By not defending himself, by not rising to her bait, he had somehow offended her more than if he had responded angrily. This world sits at the intersection of 3 major hyperspace lanes, she said, her voice taking on a lecturing tone that made it clear she enjoyed explaining things to her inferiors. The Empire has decided that a proper military installation is needed here. Your little farming colony will need to be relocated. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. 3 years of work. Thousands of colonists who had built lives here. Agricultural research that could benefit worlds throughout human space. All of it to be swept aside because the Empire wanted a military base. I see, Marcus said carefully. What kind of timeline are we looking at for the relocation? Timeline? Princess Zaratai's amusement was genuine now. Oh, you misunderstand. There is no timeline because there is no relocation. The colonists will be given transportation to the nearest imperial labor facility where their continued existence might serve some useful purpose. The infrastructure will be demolished to make room for our installations. The nearest imperial labor facility is in the Rigel sector, one of Marcus's fellow colonists had approached without him noticing. Sarah Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, was the colony's administrator and one of the toughest negotiators Marcus had ever met. That's a 14-month journey in standard imperial transports. Most of our colonists are families with children and elderly members. They won't survive that journey in cargo holds. Princess Zaratai turned her attention to Sarah with the kind of focus a snake gives to a mouse it's considering eating. The survival rate of relocated populations is not the Empire's concern. Our concern is the efficient utilization of strategically important worlds. Efficient utilization, Marcus repeated quietly. The phrase was so clinical, so devoid of any recognition that they were talking about human lives, that it took him a moment to process what he had actually heard. Yes, the princess said, apparently taking his repetition as a request for clarification. This world will be far more valuable as an imperial military installation than as a... She gestured again at the surrounding farms, collection of barely productive agricultural plots worked by a technologically primitive species. That was when Marcus felt something change inside him. Not anger, exactly. Anger was hot and immediate and usually led to poor decisions. This was something colder and more permanent. A recognition that no amount of politeness or diplomacy was going to change the fundamental nature of this situation. He looked around at the fields he had spent 3 years nurturing. At the crops that would feed colonies throughout the sector. At the research stations where he and his team had developed new growing techniques that could work on worlds previously thought uninhabitable. At the homes where families had built lives and raised children and created something worth preserving. Then, he looked back at Princess Zaratai, who was watching him with the kind of expression a cat might have while playing with a mouse. She was enjoying this. The casual destruction of everything he and thousands of others had worked to build was entertainment to her. I understand, Marcus said finally. The princess smiled, a disturbing expression on her alien features. I am pleased to hear it. Cooperation makes these transitions so much more efficient. Now, we will need detailed maps of all infrastructure, population centers, and resource deposits. I trust you can provide these within the standard imperial timeframe? What timeframe would that be? Sarah asked. One of your local days, the princess replied casually. My advanced teams need to begin preliminary demolition surveys. Marcus felt his tablet vibrate with an incoming message. Probably from one of the other agricultural stations, wondering about the imperial ships that had appeared on every horizon. Wondering if their families were about to be displaced, their lives destroyed, their work erased. He thought about the message he would have to send back. About the conversations he would have to have with children who would ask why they had to leave their homes. About the research that would be lost, the crops that would be destroyed, the communities that would be scattered to the four winds. Princess Zaratai was still smiling. Of course, Your Highness, Marcus said. I'll get right on that. And, in that moment, as he looked into her compound eyes and saw nothing but casual cruelty reflected back at him, Marcus Chen made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. He just didn't know it yet. Marcus spent the next 18 hours compiling the most comprehensive infrastructure report in colonial history. Not because he wanted to help the imperial forces with their demolition survey, but because he believed in doing any job completely and correctly, even when that job was documenting everything he was about to lose. He mapped every building, every road, every water purification plant and power generator. He cataloged the genetic modifications in each crop strain and the soil conditioning that had made them possible. He documented the locations of schools and hospitals and community centers. He recorded the names and ages of every colonist, their skills and their specializations and their family relationships. It was, in its way, a love letter to everything the colony had accomplished. A detailed memorial to 3 years of human ingenuity, determination, and hope. Princess Zaratai reviewed the reports in the colony's main conference room, her retinue arranged around her like attendant predators. Marcus and Sarah sat across the table, along with the heads of the other major departments. The atmosphere was thick with tension and barely suppressed grief. This is quite thorough, the princess said, scrolling through page after page of documentation on her imperial tablet. Your species may be primitive, but you are certainly meticulous in your record keeping. She paused at one section, her compound eyes reflecting the tablet's glow. These crop yields are impressive for such basic agricultural methods. My xenobiology specialists indicate that some of these modifications should not be possible given your technological limitations. Marcus said nothing. He had learned that explaining human agricultural science to aliens who considered humans primitive was generally a waste of time. They either dismissed it as impossible or claimed that any success was just luck. The soil conditioning alone represents months of work, one of the princess's scientists observed, looking up from his own analysis. The mineral balance they have achieved should not be stable in this planetary environment. And, yet it clearly is stable, Princess Zaratai said with mild irritation. Are you questioning the accuracy of their data? No, Your Highness. I am questioning how they achieved results that our own agricultural specialists would consider unlikely. The princess turned her attention back to Marcus. Explain how you accomplished the soil conditioning with primitive human technology. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. The question itself was respectful enough, but the tone made it clear that she expected either a confession of fraud or an admission that human success was some kind of accident. Integrated biological systems, Marcus said finally. We use carefully balanced populations of microorganisms to maintain soil chemistry. The process takes time and requires constant monitoring, but it produces results that are sustainable long-term. Microorganisms, the princess repeated flatly. Yes. Bacteria, fungi, various other microscopic life forms. We introduce them in specific proportions and, then, maintain environmental conditions that allow them to create the chemical balance we need. The princess exchanged glances with her scientific advisor, who made a note on his own tablet. Biological pest control is hardly unknown in the galaxy. What you describe is merely a more primitive version of standard ecological management. Perhaps, Marcus agreed. There was no point in explaining that human biological pest control was actually more sophisticated than what most spacefaring species used. That Earth's complex ecosystem had taught humans to think in terms of balance and interaction rather than simple domination. That the agricultural methods they dismissed as primitive actually required deeper understanding of biological systems than the chemical and mechanical approaches favored by most galactic civilizations. Princess Zaratai continued reading. This water purification system is interesting. Your engineers claim to process contaminated groundwater to a purity level that exceeds imperial standards. The water on this world has high concentrations of heavy metals, Sarah explained. Our systems were designed specifically to handle those contaminants. And, you accomplish this without industrial-scale processing facilities? Distributed processing, Marcus said. Multiple smaller units spread throughout the colony. More efficient for a settlement this size, and more resilient if individual units fail. Another note from the scientific advisor. Marcus could guess what was being written. Probably something about surprising resourcefulness from a primitive species, or interesting applications of basic technology. The kind of patronizing observations that alien scientists love to make about human engineering. The princess moved on to the population data. These family structures are unusually stable for a frontier colony. Imperial colonies typically show much higher rates of social breakdown in the first 5 years. People work harder to build something when they expect to stay and benefit from it, Sarah said simply. An optimistic assumption, the princess replied. Most species find that frontier conditions create competition for limited resources, leading to social fragmentation and eventual collapse without strong imperial oversight. Marcus bit back his first 3 responses to that statement. The imperial colonies he had seen were efficient at resource extraction but utterly dependent on constant supply from the core worlds. Self-sufficiency was apparently not something the empire valued in its frontier settlements. The review continued for another 2 hours. Princess Zaratai examined every aspect of the colony's operations with the thoroughness of someone conducting an academic study. Her questions were intelligent and her observations showed a genuine understanding of the challenges involved in frontier colonization. Which somehow made the whole situation worse. This was not some distant bureaucrat making decisions based on incomplete information. This was someone who clearly understood exactly what was about to be destroyed, and who had apparently decided that the strategic value of a military base outweighed the loss of a successful human colony. Your medical facilities are surprisingly comprehensive, the princess observed, reviewing the hospital schematics. Full surgical capability, advanced diagnostic equipment, even genetic therapy options. Frontier colonies can't depend on evacuation to core world medical facilities, Dr. Elizabeth Torres, the colony's chief medical officer, replied. We have to be prepared to handle any medical emergency locally. Including emergencies that would challenge imperial medical facilities? We do what we have to do, Dr. Torres said with quiet pride. The princess made another note. Marcus wondered if she was documenting everything impressive about the colony so she could claim credit for discovering hidden human capabilities, or if she was simply being thorough about cataloging what was about to be eliminated. The educational facilities are also noteworthy, the princess continued. Advanced mathematics, physical sciences, engineering, even xenobiology. This curriculum would be acceptable at most imperial educational institutions. Our children deserve the best education we can provide, said James Wright, the head of the colony's educational program. We may be on the frontier, but that doesn't mean we accept limitations on what our kids can learn. And these research laboratories? Marcus felt his stomach tighten. The research labs were his pride and joy, the place where he and his team had developed agricultural techniques that were already being used on dozens of worlds throughout human space. Agricultural research, he said simply. Crop development, soil management, sustainable farming techniques. The equipment inventories suggest research capabilities that exceed what would be expected for simple agricultural work. Good farming requires good science. The princess spent a long time examining the research facility data. Her compound eyes flicked back and forth across her tablet screen, occasionally pausing to cross-reference something with her scientific advisor. Finally, she looked up at Marcus directly. These research programs you have been conducting. They represent significant advances in agricultural science, do they not? Marcus hesitated. Admitting the value of his work might make the imperial forces more interested in preserving it, but it might also make them more interested in claiming it for themselves. We've had some success developing crops that can grow in challenging environments, he said carefully. Some success, the princess repeated with what might have been amusement. According to your data, you have created crop strains that can survive in environments where imperial agricultural specialists would expect complete failure. You have developed soil management techniques that produce yields 20% higher than standard imperial methods. You have essentially solved the fundamental challenges of frontier agriculture. We've made progress, Marcus acknowledged. Progress, Princess Zaratai said thoughtfully. Yes, I suppose that is one way to describe completely revolutionizing agricultural science using nothing but primitive human technology and stubborn determination. For the first time since the imperial delegation had arrived, Marcus heard something in the princess's voice that might have been respect. It was a tiny thing, barely noticeable, but it was there. Your Highness, her scientific advisor interjected, if these research programs are as advanced as they appear to be, perhaps we should consider preserving the facilities and relocating the research staff to an imperial research institution where their work could be properly supported. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He could see where this was heading. The Empire would take the research, take the scientists, take everything of value, and leave the rest of the colonists to whatever fate awaited them in imperial labor facilities. Princess Zaratai considered the suggestion for a long moment. An interesting proposal. Dr. Chen, would you be interested in continuing your research under imperial auspices? The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Marcus could feel everyone in the room watching him, waiting to see what he would say. Some probably hoping he would accept and, at least save the research that could benefit colonies throughout human space. Others probably dreading the possibility that he would abandon them for his own safety. What would happen to the rest of the colonists? Marcus asked. That would not be your concern, the princess replied smoothly. Imperial research facilities provide housing and support for essential personnel. Your colleagues who demonstrate sufficient capability could potentially be included in the transfer. And the families? The children? The people who built this place? As I explained earlier, non-essential personnel would be relocated to appropriate imperial facilities where their labor could be utilized more efficiently. Marcus looked around the room at faces he had known for 3 years. People who had worked alongside him in impossible heat and bitter cold to build something that mattered. People who had trusted him to help create a future for their families. He thought about the research that could be lost if the Empire destroyed everything. About the agricultural techniques that could feed millions of people if they were preserved and developed further. About the logical, rational choice that any reasonable person would make in his situation. Then, he looked back at Princess Zaratai's compound eyes and saw the expression there. Satisfaction. Pleasure in the power to separate families and destroy communities with a casual gesture. The same expression she had worn when announcing the colony's destruction. No thank you, Your Highness, Marcus said quietly. I appreciate the offer, but I'll stay with my people. The princess's expression shifted to something Marcus couldn't quite read. Surprise, perhaps, or disappointment that her game was ending sooner than expected. How unfortunate, she said. I am sure the Empire would have found your research quite valuable. I'm sure it would have, Marcus agreed. And, in that moment, as he watched Princess Zaratai's compound eyes narrow with what might have been anger or frustration, Marcus realized that he had just done something that very few beings in the galaxy had ever dared to do. He had said no to the Vorthan Empire. The silence that followed Marcus's refusal stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Princess Zaratai's compound eyes fixed on him with predatory intensity, as if she were seeing him clearly for the first time. Around the conference table, her retinue shifted uncomfortably, uncertain how to react to something that simply didn't happen in their experience. You are refusing an offer to join the Imperial Research Division, the princess said slowly, as if testing whether the words made sense when spoken aloud. "Yes, Your Highness," Marcus replied. "An offer that would preserve your research, advance your career, and provide you with resources beyond anything your primitive colony could offer. I understand the benefits of your offer. And you are choosing instead to accompany your fellow colonists to an imperial labor facility where your skills will be completely wasted and your research will be destroyed." Marcus looked around the table at his friends and colleagues. Sarah, who had negotiated water rights with 3 different alien species and somehow convinced them all that they had gotten a good deal. Dr. Torres, who had saved dozens of lives with equipment held together by spare parts and determination. James Wright, who had taught alien children to speak English and human children to speak Galactic Standard. Dozens of other people who had built something meaningful from nothing but raw dirt and stubborn hope. "I'm choosing to stay with my people," Marcus said simply. Princess Zaratai leaned back in her chair, studying him with the kind of attention a scientist might give to an unexpected experimental result. "Your people," she repeated. "These farmers and laborers and technicians who will be dead within a year of arriving at their assigned facility." "They're not just farmers and laborers," Marcus said, feeling heat rise in his voice despite his best efforts to remain calm. "They're families. They're communities. They're human beings who have built something worth preserving." "Human beings," the princess said with something that might have been amusement. "Yes, I suppose you would see it that way." Marcus felt the warning signs of approaching disaster but couldn't quite identify where they were coming from. Something in the princess's tone had shifted, becoming more casual and conversational. In his experience, that was when alien aristocrats became most dangerous. "Tell me, Dr. Chen," Princess Zaratai continued, "what is it about these particular humans that makes them worth preserving? What makes them special compared to the billions of other humans scattered throughout the galaxy?" It was a trap of some kind, but Marcus couldn't see the shape of it yet. "They're not special," he said carefully. "They're just people trying to build decent lives for themselves and their families." "Trying to build decent lives," the princess repeated thoughtfully. "And you believe this effort makes them worthy of survival?" "I believe all people are worthy of survival." "All people," Princess Zaratai said with a smile that made Marcus's skin crawl. How charmingly naive. "Do you extend this belief to all species, or just your own?" "All sentient species deserve basic dignity and respect," Marcus replied, though he was beginning to suspect that this particular sentient species might be testing the limits of his philosophical convictions. "Basic dignity and respect," the princess mused. "Such abstract concepts. Tell me, Dr. Chen, do you believe that the Vorthan Empire deserves basic dignity and respect?" Marcus hesitated. The honest answer was that he believed individual Vorthans deserved dignity and respect as sentient beings, but that the Empire as an institution was a predatory force that showed little regard for anyone else's dignity. But saying that to the Empire's representative seemed like a poor survival strategy. "I believe all sentient beings deserve to be treated with dignity," he said instead. "How diplomatic," Princess Zaratai said with obvious amusement. "But you did not answer my question. Do you believe that the Vorthan Empire, as an institution, deserves your respect?" The trap was becoming clearer now. Any answer Marcus gave would be wrong. If he said yes, he would be lying and she would know it. If he said no, he would be insulting the Empire to the face of one of its highest representatives. "I respect the Empire's power and authority in this region of space," Marcus said finally. "Its power and authority," the princess repeated. "But not its right to exercise that power and authority." "I didn't say that. You didn't need to. Your meaning is quite clear." Princess Zaratai leaned forward, her compound eyes reflecting the conference room's lights like multifaceted jewels. "You believe that your little colony has more right to exist than the Empire has to claim this world for strategic purposes. I believe that displacing thousands of people should require better justification than military convenience." The words were out before Marcus could stop them, and he immediately regretted the honesty. Around the table, his fellow colonists looked like they were watching someone step off a cliff. But Princess Zaratai's smile only widened. "Better justification than military convenience," she said with obvious delight. "How wonderfully arrogant. Tell me, Dr. Chen, what gives you the authority to judge the Empire's justifications? I'm not judging anything, Marcus said, trying to retreat from the dangerous ground he had wandered onto. I'm simply expressing concern for the welfare of the colonists. No, you are questioning the Empire's decisions. You are suggesting that our strategic requirements should be subject to your approval. The princess's voice was still conversational, almost friendly, but there was something underneath it now that made the air feel thicker. That's not what I meant. But it is what you said. You believe that the Empire should provide better justification for its actions. You believe that your opinion of our justifications matters. You believe that the welfare of a few thousand humans outweighs the strategic interests of an empire that spans half the galaxy. Marcus realized that he was trapped in a conversation that could only end badly. Every response he could think of would either make him look weak or get him into deeper trouble. I believe that people's lives matter, he said quietly. People's lives, Princess Zaratai repeated. Human lives, you mean? All people's lives. Including Vorthan lives, presumably. Of course. Then, you must appreciate that this military installation will protect Vorthan lives by securing our strategic interests in this sector. You must understand that the lives of Imperial citizens outweigh the convenience of human colonists. Marcus felt the conversation sliding into territory where there were no safe answers. I understand the Empire's strategic concerns, he said. But, you do not agree with our assessment of priorities. It's not my place to agree or disagree with Imperial policy. How refreshingly honest, the princess said with genuine seeming pleasure. At last, an acknowledgement of your proper place in the galactic hierarchy. The casual dismissal in her voice was like a slap. Marcus felt his carefully maintained diplomatic composure begin to crack. My proper place, he repeated. Yes. As a member of a client species under Imperial protection. Your role is to follow Imperial directives, not to evaluate their wisdom or appropriateness. And, if those directives destroy everything we've worked to build? Then, you rebuild elsewhere, if you are capable of doing so. The Empire's needs take precedence over the convenience of its subjects. Marcus looked around the table again at faces that had become family over 3 years of shared struggle. People who had trusted him to help them build something worth having. People who were about to lose everything because an alien princess had decided their lives didn't matter. Subjects, he said quietly. Not citizens. Not allies. Subjects. Exactly. I am pleased that you understand your status. Princess Zaratai's smile was radiant now, the expression of someone who had successfully established dominance in a situation where it had been temporarily unclear. And, that was when Marcus felt something shift inside him. Not anger, exactly, though anger was part of it. Something deeper and, more fundamental. A recognition that no amount of diplomacy or compromise was going to change the essential nature of this relationship. Your Highness, he said, his voice steady despite the storm building in his chest, may I ask you a question? You may. Do you enjoy this? Princess Zaratai tilted her head slightly. Enjoy what, Dr. Chen? This. The casual destruction of people's lives. The reduction of sentient beings to strategic resources. The demonstration of your power to take everything away from people who have never done you any harm. The conference room went dead silent. Even the quiet hum of the air circulation system seemed to stop. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. I perform my duties to the Empire, Princess Zaratai said carefully. Questions of enjoyment are irrelevant. Are they? Marcus asked. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're having the time of your life. The princess's compound eyes narrowed dangerously. Dr. Chen, I would advise caution in how you address a member of the Imperial family. Why? Marcus asked, and his voice was completely calm now, the way it got when he had moved past anger into something much more dangerous. What are you going to do, destroy my colony and exile my people to labor camps? The silence stretched taut again. Marcus could feel everyone in the room holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Princess Zaratai stood slowly, her movements deliberate and predatory. Dr. Chen, she said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that had toppled governments and ended civilizations, you will show proper respect to your betters, or you will discover that there are fates much worse than relocation to imperial labor facilities. Marcus looked up at her towering figure, at the casual arrogance in her posture, at the absolute certainty in her compound eyes that he would back down and grovel and beg for forgiveness. And then, he stood up. He didn't say anything. He didn't make any grand speeches or dramatic gestures. He simply stood up, looked Princess Zaratai directly in her multifaceted eyes, and said the words that would echo through galactic history, "No, Your Highness. I don't think I will." For a moment that lasted forever, they stood face to face across the conference table. The representative of an empire that had never met serious resistance, and a human farmer who had decided that some things were worth more than survival. Then, Princess Zaratai smiled, and Marcus knew that whatever happened next was going to change everything. "How refreshing," she said softly. "It has been so long since I met someone with genuine backbone. Tell me, Dr. Chen, do you have any idea what happens to primitives who refuse to show proper respect to their superiors?" "I imagine you're going to tell me," Marcus replied. "Indeed I am." The princess's smile was predatory now, all pretense of diplomatic courtesy abandoned. "But, first, I think it would be educational for you to understand exactly what kind of creature you have chosen to defy." She leaned forward, her forehands planted on the conference table, her compound eyes reflecting the overhead lights like a kaleidoscope of malice. "I am Princess Zaratai of the House of Eternal Victory. I am the heir to an empire that spans 14,000 star systems. I have personally overseen the conquest of 37 worlds and the subjugation of 9 different species. Entire civilizations have begged for the mercy I have refused to grant them." Marcus said nothing. "I have watched cities burn from orbit and felt nothing but mild satisfaction at the efficiency of imperial weapons. I have ordered the execution of planetary populations and slept soundly afterward. I have reduced proud species to slavery and broken the will of beings who thought themselves my equals." Still nothing from Marcus. "And you," Princess Zaratai continued, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than her earlier shouts, "you are a dirt farmer from a backwater world whose entire species exists only because the Empire allows it. You are less significant than the dust beneath my feet. You are nothing." She straightened up, her smile widening as she prepared to deliver what she clearly expected to be the final blow to Marcus's defiance. "So tell me, little human," she said with infinite contempt, "what possible delusion makes you think that your pathetic life has enough value to justify refusing me anything?" The conference room held its breath. Every person present, human and Vorthan alike, waited for Marcus's response to Princess Zaratai's devastating question. Some expected him to break, to finally understand the impossible gulf between himself and imperial nobility. Others hoped he would somehow find words that could bridge that gulf. Marcus Chen looked at Princess Zaratai for a long moment. He studied her compound eyes, her predatory smile, the casual arrogance that radiated from every line of her posture. He thought about everything she had said, about the civilization she had destroyed and the lives she had ended and the absolute certainty with which she viewed her own superiority. Then, he did something that no one in that room had expected, something so unprecedented that it would be discussed in xenopsychology texts for generations to come. He smiled. Not the angry smile of defiance, not the bitter smile of defeated resignation. A genuine, almost gentle smile, the kind a teacher might give to a student who had just revealed a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of the universe. "Your Highness," Marcus said quietly, "I think you've answered your own question." Princess Zaratai's expression flickered with confusion. "Explain. You asked what delusion makes me think my life has value. But, you just spent the last 5 minutes explaining exactly why it does." "I explained why your life has no value," the princess said with growing irritation. "I demonstrated the vast difference between your insignificance and my importance." "No," Marcus said, his smile never wavering, "you explained why you need me to believe my life has no value. You explained why the entire imperial system depends on people accepting that they don't matter." The princess's compound eyes narrowed dangerously. "Clarify your meaning." "You rule 14,000 star systems," Marcus said conversationally. "You've conquered 37 worlds and subjugated 9 species. You've destroyed civilizations and broken the will of entire peoples. That's quite an impressive resume. It is the natural result of Vorthan superiority, Princess Zaratai replied coldly. Is it? Marcus asked. Or is it the natural result of people believing they have no choice but to submit? The silence in the room had taken on a different quality now. Where before it had been tense with anticipation, now it felt charged with possibility, as if fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality were being questioned. People submit because resistance is futile, the princess said. The Empire's power is absolute. Your power is absolute over people who accept it as absolute, Marcus corrected gently. But, what happens when someone simply doesn't? They are destroyed. Are they? Marcus gestured around the conference room. You've been here for 3 days. You've had every opportunity to demonstrate this absolute power you claim. And, yet here I am, still refusing to show you the respect you think you deserve. Still treating you like just another person instead of the goddess you apparently believe yourself to be. Princess Zaratai's compound eyes were reflecting the overhead lights like angry stars now. You exist at my sufferance, human. I could end your life with a gesture. You could try, Marcus agreed. But, even if you succeeded, what would that prove? That you can kill an unarmed man who's offering no violence? That's not power, Your Highness. That's just murder. It would prove that I am your superior. Would it? Marcus asked. Or would it prove that you're so insecure about your supposed superiority that you have to kill anyone who questions it? The words hit Princess Zaratai like physical blows. Her entire body tensed, her forearms clenching into fists, her compound eyes blazing with fury. Around the table, her retinue shifted uncomfortably, uncertain whether they should intervene or simply watch their mistress handle this unprecedented situation. You dare suggest that I am insecure, the princess hissed. I'm suggesting that secure people don't need to constantly prove their superiority, Marcus replied calmly. Secure people don't need to destroy everyone who refuses to grovel. Secure people don't spend their time explaining to dirt farmers how important they are. I am explaining the natural order of the galaxy, Princess Zaratai snarled. I am educating you about your place in the hierarchy of species. Your Highness, Marcus said gently, I know exactly where I stand in the galactic hierarchy. I'm a human being from a frontier agricultural colony. In terms of political power, I'm absolutely insignificant. In terms of military might, I'm completely helpless. In terms of social status, I barely register as existing. The princess's expression shifted to satisfaction. Finally, you begin to understand. But, here's what you don't understand, Marcus continued, his voice still calm and conversational. None of that changes the fact that I'm a person. None of that changes the fact that my life and the lives of my friends and family have meaning and value. None of that changes the fact that we've built something worth preserving here. Your meaning and value are determined by your usefulness to the Empire, Princess Zaratai snapped. Nothing else matters. To you, perhaps, Marcus said. But, not to me. And, certainly not to the people who matter to me. I matter, the princess said with deadly quiet. The Empire matters. Your opinions about meaning and value are irrelevant. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. You know what, Your Highness? You're absolutely right. Princess Zaratai blinked in surprise. I am? Completely. My opinions about meaning and value are irrelevant to you and your empire. Just like your opinions about meaning and value are irrelevant to me and my people. The princess stared at him for a long moment, trying to process what he had just said. That is not how hierarchy works, she said finally. Maybe not, Marcus agreed. But, it's how dignity works. He stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Around the table, everyone tensed, waiting to see what would happen next. Thank you for your time, Your Highness, Marcus said politely. I hope you find what you're looking for on our world. What do you think you are doing? Princess Zaratai demanded. Leaving, Marcus said simply. This conversation isn't accomplishing anything productive, and I have work to do. You cannot simply leave, the princess sputtered. I did not dismiss you. Marcus paused at the conference room door and looked back at her. Your Highness, with all due respect, I don't require your permission to end a conversation. You are a subject of the Empire, Princess Zaratai said, her voice rising. You will remain until I am finished with you. Marcus considered this for a moment. No, he said finally. I don't think I will. And then, he did something that would be remembered as the moment everything changed. He turned around and walked away. Not dramatically. Not angrily. Not with any grand gestures or final speeches. He simply turned around and walked out of the conference room, leaving Princess Zaratai standing there with her mouth open and her compound eyes wide with shock. For a moment, no one moved. The very concept of someone walking away from imperial nobility was so foreign that it took time for anyone to process what had actually happened. Then, Princess Zaratai found her voice. Guards, she shrieked. Stop him. But Marcus was already gone, and her guards were looking at each other with uncertainty. They had been trained to handle many situations, but pursuing a human who had politely excused himself from a meeting was not among them. Your Highness, one of the guards said hesitantly, what are your orders? Princess Zaratai stood there for a long moment, her compound eyes reflecting the conference room lights like a broken kaleidoscope. Her four hands were clenched into fists, her entire body trembling with rage and something else that she couldn't quite identify. Find him, she said finally. Bring him back here immediately. And if he refuses to come, the guard asked. Princess Zaratai opened her mouth to give the obvious order, then stopped. Because suddenly, inexplicably, she wasn't sure what the obvious order should be. Killing the human would prove her power, but it would also prove that his words had affected her enough to require a response. Letting him go would show mercy, but it would also show that she had no answer to his quiet defiance. For the first time in her life, Princess Zaratai of the House of Eternal Victory was faced with a situation that her extensive education in imperial authority had never prepared her for. Someone had said no and walked away, and she had no idea what to do about it. Outside the conference room, Marcus Chen walked calmly through the Colonial Administration building, past startled staff members and confused imperial personnel. He nodded politely to everyone he passed, as if he were simply going about his normal daily routine instead of having just committed what might have been the first act of successful defiance against the Vorthan Empire in its 1,000-year history. He stepped outside into the afternoon sunlight and looked around at the colony he had helped build. The fields stretched away toward the horizon, green and productive and beautiful. Children were playing in the school playground, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. Adults were going about their daily work, maintaining the infrastructure and tending the crops and building the future they had all worked so hard to create. It was going to be destroyed. The Empire would follow through on its plans, and everything he could see would be erased to make room for military installations. The people he cared about would be scattered to the stars, and most of them would probably die in imperial labor facilities. But, for this moment, at least, it was still here. Still beautiful. Still worth everything they had invested in it. Marcus took out his communicator and activated the colony-wide channel. When he spoke, his voice was calm and steady, carrying clearly to every receiver in the settlement. This is Marcus Chen, he said. I have an announcement to make about our situation with the Imperial delegation. Please gather in the main square at your earliest convenience. We have some things to discuss. As he walked toward the square, Marcus could feel eyes watching him from the administration building windows. He didn't look back. He had said everything that needed to be said, and now it was time to focus on the people who mattered. Behind him, in the conference room, Princess Zaratai was still standing exactly where he had left her, trying to understand what had just happened and why she felt like the universe had suddenly shifted around her. For the first time in her privileged, powerful life, someone had treated her like she was just another person whose opinions carried no special weight. Someone had listened to her threats and her boasts and her demonstrations of superiority, and had simply decided that none of it mattered enough to change his behavior. It was impossible. It was unprecedented. And it was going to change everything. 3 months later, the galaxy was still trying to understand what had happened on Kepler 442b. The story had spread like wildfire through human space and beyond, carried by traders and diplomats and refugees who had heard about the farmer who had said no to the Vorthan Empire and walked away. Each telling added new details and embellishments, but the core remained the same: a simple human being had refused to bow to imperial authority and had somehow gotten away with it. Marcus Chen stood in the observation deck of the UES Resilience, watching the stars will pass through the viewport. The ship was bound for New Geneva, where he was scheduled to address the Human Colonial Council about agricultural development programs. It wasn't the life he had planned, but it was the life that circumstances had given him. The colony was gone, of course. Princess Zaratai had followed through on her threat, though the demolition had been notably less thorough than originally planned. The research facilities had been preserved, their equipment carefully catalogued and shipped to Imperial scientific installations. The colonists had been relocated, though not to labor facilities as originally threatened. Most had been transported to established human worlds where their skills were needed and valued. It was still a tragedy. Communities had been scattered, lives disrupted, dreams abandoned. But it was not the wholesale destruction that had originally been planned, and that small mercy was being attributed to the conversation in the conference room and what had followed. "Penny for your thoughts," said Dr. Sarah Chen, joining him at the viewport. She had accepted a position with the Colonial Development Authority and would be working with Marcus on his new assignment. Just thinking about unintended consequences, Marcus replied. "I never meant to start a political movement." "Didn't you?" Sarah asked with a slight smile. "You stood up to the Empire's representative and walked away when she tried to intimidate you. What did you think would happen?" Marcus shrugged. "I thought they'd probably shoot me and get on with destroying the colony. I certainly didn't expect to become some kind of symbol of human resistance." The movement had been entirely spontaneous, growing out of nothing more than word-of-mouth stories about what had happened in that conference room. Humans throughout the galaxy had heard about Marcus's quiet refusal to be diminished by imperial arrogance, and something about it had resonated with experiences they had all shared but never articulated. It wasn't organized resistance. There were no manifestos or political programs or calls for revolution. It was simply people deciding that they didn't have to accept casual dismissal of their worth as human beings. Diplomats who stopped apologizing for humanity's alleged primitiveness. Traders who negotiated with alien species as equals rather than supplicants. Colonists who built communities based on their own values rather than what other species expected from them. The Empire was calling it human dignity syndrome and treating it as a psychological disorder that needed to be corrected. But the syndrome kept spreading, and no amount of imperial psychological expertise seemed capable of finding a cure. "Have you heard the latest reports from the Centauri sector?" Sarah asked. Marcus shook his head. 3 human colonies have refused to pay increased tribute to the imperial tax collectors. They're not rebelling or anything dramatic. They're just saying no and inviting the Empire to explain why the increased tribute is justified. What's the Empire doing about it? Nothing, so far. I think they're still trying to figure out how to respond to resistance that doesn't involve violence or dramatic gestures. Hard to crush someone who just politely disagrees with you and, then, goes back to their daily routine. Marcus had been following the reports with fascination and growing concern. The movement that had grown out of his encounter with Princess Zaratai was spreading faster than anyone had expected, and in directions no one had predicted. It wasn't limited to interactions with the Vorthan Empire. Humans were approaching other alien species differently as well, with a quiet confidence that was apparently both attractive and deeply unsettling to established galactic hierarchies. "There's something else," Sarah said carefully. "Something you should probably know before we reach New Geneva." Marcus looked at her expectantly. "Princess Zaratai has been reassigned. Officially, it's a promotion to a position in the Imperial Core Worlds. Unofficially, the rumor is that her family was concerned about her effectiveness in dealing with client species after the Kepler 442b incident." "Concerned how?" "She's been requesting extended meetings with human representatives. Asking detailed questions about human psychology, human social structures, human concepts of individual dignity. Her superiors think she's become too interested in understanding the species she's supposed to be managing." Marcus frowned. That doesn't sound like the same person who tried to intimidate me in that conference room. No, it doesn't. And that's apparently what has the imperial hierarchy worried. Their conversation was interrupted by an announcement over the ship's communication system. Dr. Chen, please report to the communications center. You have an incoming priority message. Marcus exchanged glances with Sarah, then made his way through the ship's corridors to the communications center. The officer on duty gestured toward a private communication booth. Encrypted transmission, sir. Origin point is listed as Imperial Core Worlds. Marcus felt his stomach tighten as he entered the booth and activated the communication system. The holographic display flickered to life, resolving into the familiar compound eyes and chitinous features of Princess Zaratai. She looked different somehow. Still unmistakably aristocratic, still carrying herself with the confidence of someone born to command, but there was something in her expression that hadn't been there during their last encounter. Dr. Chen, she said without preamble. I hope this communication finds you well. Your Highness, Marcus replied carefully. I must admit I wasn't expecting to hear from you. I imagine not. The princess paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. I wanted to inform you that your agricultural research has been reviewed by imperial scientists. Your techniques are being implemented on 17 different worlds, with remarkable success. Marcus said nothing, waiting to see where this conversation was headed. The soil conditioning methods you developed have increased crop yields by an average of 32%. The genetic modifications you created for your crop strains are being adapted for use in environments previously considered unsuitable for agriculture. Your work is going to feed millions of imperial citizens. I'm pleased to hear that the research is proving useful, Marcus said diplomatically. Useful, Princess Zaratai repeated with what might have been amusement. Yes, that is one way to describe work that represents fundamental advances in agricultural science. She leaned forward slightly, her compound eyes reflecting the communication display's light. Dr. Chen, I have spent the last 3 months studying human behavioral patterns and psychological frameworks. It has been educational. I see. Do you? I wonder. The princess was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider her words carefully. Tell me, Dr. Chen, when you walked out of that conference room, did you intend to inspire a galaxy-wide movement of human self-assertion? No, Your Highness. I was simply ending a conversation that wasn't accomplishing anything productive. Simply ending a conversation, she repeated thoughtfully. And, yet that simple action has had consequences that neither of us could have predicted. Marcus waited for her to continue. The Empire is struggling to understand how to respond to what humans are calling the dignity movement, Princess Zaratai said. Traditional methods of control are proving ineffective against people who simply refuse to acknowledge the validity of those methods. I've heard some reports to that effect. Have you considered the possibility that this was your intention all along? The princess asked. That your entire performance in that conference room was designed to achieve exactly this result? Marcus thought about the question seriously before answering. No, Your Highness. I was just trying to hold on to something that mattered to me. Something that mattered to you, she repeated softly. Yes, I believe you are telling the truth. Which makes what you accomplished even more remarkable. The communication display flickered slightly, suggesting transmission difficulties across the vast distance between them. Dr. Chen, Princess Zaratai said, her voice taking on a formal quality that suggested this was the real reason for her call. I want you to know that I have recommended to the Imperial Council that the Vorthan Empire revise its policies regarding client species management. Marcus felt his eyebrows rise in surprise. Recommended how? I have suggested that the Empire's long-term interests would be better served by treating client species as partners rather than subjects. That dignity and respect, properly managed, can be more effective tools of governance than fear and subjugation. The silence stretched between them across the light years, filled with implications that neither of them had fully processed yet. May I ask what prompted this recommendation? Marcus asked finally. Princess Zaratai's compound eyes seemed to focus on something beyond the communication display. You asked me once whether I enjoyed the casual destruction of people's lives. At the time, I dismissed the question as impertinent. But I have found myself returning to it repeatedly over these past months. And what conclusion have you reached? That the question itself reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of what power should be used for, she said quietly. I was educated to believe that the ability to destroy was proof of superiority. But you demonstrated something that my education never acknowledged. Which was that the choice not to be diminished is more powerful than the ability to diminish others. Marcus felt something shift in his understanding of the conversation they were having. This wasn't the same being who had tried to intimidate him in that conference room. This was someone who had been fundamentally changed by their encounter. Your Highness, he said carefully, what exactly are you telling me? Princess Zaratai smiled, and, for the first time since he had met her, the expression seemed genuine rather than predatory. I am telling you that you were right, Dr. Chen. Dignity is not something that can be given or taken away by external authority. It exists independently of power structures and political hierarchies. And, once someone chooses to claim their own dignity, no amount of force can make them give it up. The communication display flickered again, more severely this time. I must end this transmission, Princess Zaratai said. But I wanted you to know that your words and your actions have had consequences far beyond what either of us imagined. The galaxy is changing, Dr. Chen, and you are the reason why. Your Highness, Marcus said quickly, what happens now? Now. Princess Zaratai's smile widened. Now we discover what kind of galaxy we can build when people are treated as people instead of resources to be managed. I suspect it will be a much more interesting place than what we have now. The transmission ended, leaving Marcus alone in the communication booth with his thoughts and the vast implications of what he had just heard. He thought about a simple agricultural colony that had been destroyed to make room for a military base. About families that had been scattered and communities that had been broken. About the quiet moment when he had decided that some things were more important than survival. He thought about the movement that had grown from that moment, spreading through human space and beyond, carried by people who had simply decided that they didn't have to accept diminishment as the price of existence. And he thought about a young alien princess who had apparently learned something about dignity from a dirt farmer who had refused to grovel. The galaxy was indeed changing, and Marcus Chen was just beginning to understand what that might mean. Outside the communication booth, the stars wheeled past in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small dramas of individual lives. But, among those stars, on thousands of worlds across hundreds of light years, people were making choices about how they wanted to be treated and what they were willing to accept. And, for the first time in galactic history, more and more of them were choosing dignity. The revolution had begun not with violence or grand speeches or political manifestos, but with a simple human being who had said no and walked away without looking back. And the galaxy would never be the same.